And now, if we're really lucky, on the other end will be Dave McGowan. Dave, are you there?
I am indeed.
How are you?
Oh, I'm
okay.
good. How are you?
All right, pretty good. Dave, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, good deal.
Good.
All right, now you're up to what? I mean, you projected how many parts? I think 12 for the series Speaking, which is inside the LC, the strange but mostly true story of Laurel Canyon and the birth of the hippie generation. How's it going? How are you navigating through these waters? Apparently you know where you're going, and this is getting bigger and bigger, isn't it, by the week?
I don't know where I'm going. I'm having trouble remembering where I'm at, actually, because I'm doing another multi-part radio thing, and so I got to keep track of where I am on that show and where I am on your show and where I am on my website, all of which is different. All of which is different than where I am in my head, which is like 2 chapters ahead of where the website is. So I don't remember exactly where we left off, where the last time I was with you. So you're going to have to.
Okay. Well, you know, let me ask you this. I mean, are you conceding perhaps if you've been resistant to the idea that this could be, in totality, a book?
I think there's enough material to make it a book. I'm just kind of reluctant to go that route because the sales of my previously published books have not really been much of an encouragement for me to go to go that route again. I think if I want people to really read this material, if I want this to get out to the widest possible audience, the best way to do it is on the web.
Well, you know, the point is, and I mean, this is not what what's at the center of what we're talking about. But I mean, you know, you've done the work, so you know, I guess if there's an outlay that gets involved with having to publish a book, that could be a bit of a deal killer. But I mean, because it's so extant, and it just it would be good, I would think, to see it somewhere in totality. But you know, of course, you know better than I. But I never thought you were going to hit 12 parts, and I was surprised to see that. Where do you think the end of the road is? Do you know?
I'm not sure at this point. I don't know. The story keeps growing as we go. You know, I think actually, I think when I last spoke with you, we kind of left off. You asked about John Denver. That was you, wasn't it? That asked you about John Denver if he was connected. You had mentioned that. Yeah, my phone is not getting. Can you hear me? Because I'm not getting that great a reception on my end for some reason.
Yeah, I can hear you. It's a little bit rough, but you're there. There's not a part. I mean, but the problem is too. I was kind of speaking over you, so you know, I think that's the situation. But as far as John Denver was on the way out of a particular show, which was the next to last that we did, you know, it dawned on me too that it was really pretty public that John Dusendorf, I guess that's his name, was in fact a military brat, and you were like, yeah, I got to take a look at that. And then when you came back again, sure enough, you came across his tracks in Laurel Canyon too.
Oh, yes, so we already did cover that. Okay, yeah, like I said, I can't remember what I've covered on. Yeah, but yeah, the web it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you know, I got a lot of material that's coming in from readers and different avenues that I'd already been pursuing on my own, and I don't really know at this point where the end of the road is. There's still a lot of material that I have just, you know, as just sort of raw data, and I don't know. It could run for quite a bit longer. I'm not sure how much more mileage I'm going to get out of it, but I would say probably at least like 15 probably chapters. I would say at this point. There's 7 posted now. I got 8 almost finished, and I've written parts of 9 and 10, and I have 11 forming in my head, so I know we're going at least that far, and I would say probably about 15 at this point.
I just want to tell you, Jim, who's producing this and running the board, has said your volume's a little hot, so I don't know if you can adjust that a little bit. Just if you can back it off, that would be fine. Otherwise, you're coming in quite strongly, so there's not a problem there.
Okay.
No problem. Here's what I want to ask you. As I looked at even the third part that we were going to embark on, and part 4 as well, there was also, let me run this by you, because I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but some emails floated around between myself and Andrew Colvin and Chris Knowles. And did you come up with anything? And I believe you did, but again, I'm trying to sort things out as well, as you are where you are with different show hosts. But of police presence around the Manson place some days before, perhaps, the murders?
Who is present now?
A police presence.
At the Manson house? At the you mean at the Tate house on Cielo Drive?
I'm thinking that perhaps it might have been at his ranch, which of course would be curious if this were in fact true. And then days later, we had the events that would become, I guess, the Tate LoBianco murders. Did you come across that at all?
I have not come across that. No, this is the first actually that I've heard about it. You saying that there was some sort of police contact with him just a few days prior to the Tate murders?
Yeah, and I'm being a little vague on that, but what I'll do is I'll ship you the emails for you to take a look at. Yeah, it would seem to be very curious, obviously, because why are the cops there and what really is going on? And of course, there's all kinds of, shall we say, theories that you can spin around from that. But I'm going to ask you one other thing also, and I know I'm all around the place, but because in the time between we speak, I do correspond with some other folks who are as interested in this situation as you are. Did you get any kind of connection between any of this? And I know it may seem I may be going for the fences on this, but any kind of connection between Laurel Canyon or any persons therein and the Esalen Institute?
I have not up to this point. No, somebody wrote to me about that in an email, I believe. But no, nothing specific. No. I encountered some connections earlier when I was researching my previous book in regards to Charles Manson. He had some connections to the Esalen and also to the Himalayan Academy, I believe it was. Very similar place up there. But not in any of the current reading that I've done. I have not come across any connections.
All right. I have Andrew, who's in our kind of private chat room, or the guest, as you well know, because I've given you a link as well, and Jim and myself can correspond. And Andrew had said, and he's kind of refined my memory, he said the police presence was on the interstates leading out of town, and that town would have been Los Angeles, this according to Bruce Bickford. Apparently Manson was turned away at the gates of Esalen 3 days prior to Tate. So there's that. Again, like I said, that may not clarify nor ring a bell with you. And Andrew said that, yes, this was prior to the murders. So something was abuzz.
Yeah, I am. The visit by Charles Manson, that definitely rings a bell. I do recall reading that he had visited there, just a few days prior. I don't know that I'd heard anything about him being turned away, but I had heard that he had visited there. And I believe, wasn't there also some like phone calls placed to Esalen from the Polanski and Tate residence, I believe, or something to that effect?
Well, I'll tell you what, while you're mentioning that, and because I did bring it up, Andrew will hear that, and he may be able to clarify that. He also said there was a bunch of murders that month in L.A. So he'll have heard what you had said about phone calls, and maybe we'll get something in on that. But you know where I want to go?
There was.
Go ahead.
There was a. What's that?
No, go ahead.
I lost you there.
No, you didn't. What I was doing is I know I was speaking over you, so I just backed off. By all means, continue.
Oh, Well, I was saying there was a rash of murders that weekend. I know that in LA that the homicide rate really spiked. So yeah, there were other murders in addition to the Tate and LaBianca over I think a 4 or 5 day period or something like that. There was a huge spike in the homicide rate in LA. So that I am familiar with. So some of this rings a bell, but some of it I hadn't heard before.
Well, this part 3 is like a rap sheet on those who met their demises in strange ways, and certainly what would seem to be premature ways. But what I was thinking about is, now as you're going through this, and I guess the reason why I think about this is because of what Esalen is or isn't, and that is, was this some kind of center in Laurel Canyon? Was there something going on there of a very dark nature but very strong? Was this just a coincidence that all these characters just piled in and lived there these decades?
I don't believe it's a coincidence at all. It would be very, very difficult to argue that it was a coincidence. If you look, the material that I've covered so far, I've covered, the connections, how many of the biggest name of the rock stars of that era, the leaders of the band, Frank Zappa and Jim Morrison, Stephen Stills, David Crosby, etc. All of them, right down the line, come from the military and/or intelligence background, family background, and we've also covered how the Young Turks, these young stars of Hollywood, who were also very much a part of the scene, Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper, Bruce Dern, Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty. And that whole crowd, Sharon Tate and Jane Fonda and a couple of others, and almost all of them, right down the line, come from a military and/or intelligence family background. And then I've covered the fact that there was a secret classified military installation right there in existence, right there in Laurel Canyon, throughout this whole period that was at the very least functioning as a covert movie studio and probably much more than that. So you have all of these people from the rock and roll world and all of these people from the movie and television world, and they're all huddled in this one neighborhood, and they all just happen to have come from military intelligence families, and they all happen to be huddled around this secret military intelligence facility. And, at some point, even the most hardened of coincidence theorists has to kind of wonder whether that could really all be one big coincidence, and then there's various other factors. There's a lot of information that I've already put out and a lot more that I still have to put out. And I would think that it would be very difficult at this point to argue that it was all just, a chance occurrence.
Well, I guess where I'm heading with this, and I don't know that you do know, or you're going to tell us perhaps if you're headed that way. But what I'm wondering about is there, okay, we won't beat Esalen to death anymore, but wondering if there was some kind of I don't know, with intelligence or whatever it is going on, some kind of center there that called for these people to come in. We've got two things going on. We've got, of course, it's music. We've got many of them with family that were heavily in intelligence and military. But then you also have this body count. Have you, if I got that right, and you have those three elements, have you found any way where something's making sense here? Okay.
I'm not 100% sure exactly where it's headed. Some parts of it make sense. Other parts I'm still a little cloudy on. To some extent, it almost seems like you have all of these sons and daughters of the military intelligence community running around in the canyons, bumping each other off. And, you know, I mean, I almost want to say, hey, you know, whatever. It's none of my business if that's what you guys want to do. You know, because most of the people in the body count, you know, the people that didn't make it out alive, you know, they have the same connection. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a very odd and warped and twisted story, and hopefully by the time it's all done, it'll all make sense.
All right, I tell you what I'm going to do too, and you might not mind this because there's some people who might want to ask you questions, and that might be a good way to drive the show as well. Not that I don't have much to follow with the work that you've done, but I'm going to run this past you. And again, you know, whether it's because of the series you are doing or whether in your past you've got anything to go on this, let me preface this by saying, first of all, we had Hank Harrison on the top of the show, and this goes back to now, I guess, 3 p.m. Eastern. And he had said, not so much this last time out, Dave, but the last time around, and he's the one who had written the Dead book, of course, and who is the father of Courtney Love. But he was saying that in the time that he was in Haight-Ashbury, at the height of all that, he didn't say really at that time he thought there was any kind of military op going on or any kind of mind op going on, that any of the, you know, the Flower Children or whatever, the protesters were being necessarily backed by anything. That is not to say that that did not happen later on. But where I'm going with this is that,
No, I'm just following along with you.
All right, so where I'm going with this big old lead-up, again, we had Paul Collins, I believe, posed this to you. He said there is supposedly a connection between Esalen and Tavistock. Do you believe that contention? If so, what's the implications of that connection? You got anything on that think tank in England, which is probably the primary one, and Esalen, and I was even thinking Stanford Research Institute. Harrison says no, they weren't involved in what they were doing. So do you have anything on that, Dave?
Not really, no. I haven't really, you know, I'm aware of the Tavistock Institute and what it is and whatnot, and I get a lot of email about that, but I have not really looked into the British invasion side of it. So thus far, I've pretty much just concentrated on our side, basically, and how it developed over here. But I'm sure on my mind that there was, you know, parallel operations going on over there. Well, you know, it wasn't just coincidence that you know, both sides of the Atlantic had this you know, pop music explosion, and you know, in the hippie thing and the drugs and all that. You know, I'm quite sure that there was, but I mean, that's from my perspective, that's just basically an educated hunch. You know, it's not based on any actual research that I've done at this point.
All right. And again, like I said, folks, if you want to call in, I mean, here's your shot to do it. And a lot of emails have passed in the time that we've been between your shows, Dave. And folks, if you want to call in, it's 888-333-9009, and you can talk to Dave as well. In the meantime, though, what I'd like to do, and again, what I'm asking you is, do you think, now again, where I was talking with Hank about, that was kind of in the early to mid-'60s, you're picking this up at a later date, and things may definitely have changed. There's a lot of things heated up as we went from the 60s into the 70s. Do you see anything at the root of this where some of these obviously prominent rock people might have, were they used? Let me just say that. Do you think they were used by the power structure?
I would imagine so, yeah. I mean, yeah, probably some of them quite unwittingly would be my assumption. Yeah, that they some of them probably thought that they, you know, were genuinely fighting the good fight, you know, but they were undoubtedly compromised, and yes, probably utilized in some cases without their knowledge, basically.
Amongst them, can you histories more or less, or persons who you think might have been most likely involved in something like that? One of the situations.
Phil Oakes would be probably like the ultimate case study, you know, sort of the prototypical. Yeah, I mean, throughout his career, he was was unapologetic leftist. You know, he called his first band, I think, the Singing Socialists or something like that. And you know, he was right there at the forefront of all of the big causes in the '60s, the civil rights rallies, the anti-war rallies, the women's liberation and everything. He was right at the forefront, and by all appearances was very much a left-wing radical, who was through his music was offering his protest. And then a very strange thing happened, though, which was in the last 9 months of his life. He had a complete personality change, and he changed his name. He said that his name from then on was John Train, and he came off as this real right-wing, very authoritarian, very kind of bullying, just a complete polar opposite of the persona that he had throughout his professional life. And he declared Phil Oakes was dead and that this new persona had taken over, and claimed that for the good of societies, both, I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something to the effect of, for the good of societies, both secret and public or something, Phil Oakes had to be done away with. And he started compiling all these very odd lists that were obviously references to chemical warfare research and biological warfare research, and he claimed that he worked for the CIA, and I mean, all of it, just complete change from what he had been. And then 9 months after that change, he turned up dead. He was found swinging from the end of a rope to suicide, and that was that. And the curious thing about that is that decades before that, a guy by the name of George Estabrooks, very, very well-known, or maybe not that well-known, CIA-financed psychologist back in the World War II era, had written a book in which he described what he said would be the perfect spy, which was someone who was mind-controlled, whose personality was deliberately split to create two polar opposite personalities. The personality that everyone saw, which would be a left-wing radical, and the hidden personality, which would be a right-wing nationalist, patriotic American. And what he described years and years before, was exactly what Phil Oakes became in the last 9 months of his life. I mean, he exhibited the exact characteristics that are described by this guy many years before. So he would definitely be the guy at the top of my list for the most likely to be a guy that throughout his professional career was being manipulated, and without his, and while he thought, that he was out fighting the good fight, he was actually working for the other side, basically. Right. And that came out in the end, and I believe that's why he was killed, that he had to be eliminated, because he'd become a definite liability.
All right, Dave, we also have the first one, and Jim, can you bring that caller on first, please? I would say area code 908.
Hey, this is Chris.
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Knowles. All right.
Hey, Dave, I've been following your story. I just wanted to maybe add in some ancillary information for your research. I used to be a big fan of The Clash until I found out last year that Joe Strummer's father was a foreign service spy, and Mick Jones's father was a special branch, and that the bass player's father, who's the other major member of the band, his father was a member of the CP, just like Lee Harvey Oswald, and moved around the country in very strange, around Europe in very strange fashion. There was a lot of very strange things going on. The manager was involved in the Est group. There was a strange relationship that the band had with Rupert Murdoch. So what you're talking about doesn't seem like it ended with the Laurel Canyon situation.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. I'm not familiar with everything that you mentioned, but I have stumbled across some of that information, and also the whole a huge swath of the sort of punk new wave movement seemed to have been largely controlled by two brothers, actually, who were brothers of Stuart Copeland.
Yeah, no, it's Copeland, yeah.
What's
Ian
that?
and Miles Copeland.
Yeah, one of them ran IRS Records, and the other one ran what was it? That
he ran FBI, which was Frontier Booking International, which handled most of the punk and new wave bands in the early '80s.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I mean, obviously these were sort of meant as no inside jokes. Yeah, one of the companies is IRS and one of them is FBI, and between the two of them, they managed and produced virtually every big name new wave act that came along during that era. And both were brothers of, they managed the Police, of course, but a lot of other groups as well. Oingo Boingo, and I mean, I can't think off the top of my head. That wasn't my favorite era of music, but a lot of these, a huge proportion of the real top selling acts during that era were managed and produced by these two brothers, and both of whom were the sons of Miles Copeland, who was a very high-ranking CIA officer, and their mother was named Addie Lorraine something, was an equally high-placed British intelligence asset. So both of their parents were intelligence assets on both sides of the Atlantic, and these two brothers just happened to sort of control all, not all, but a lot of the big name new wave acts that came out during that era. So yeah, absolutely. I think I don't think it ended at all with Laurel Canyon. I don't know that it began with Laurel Canyon, but it certainly didn't end with Laurel Canyon. Yeah, I mean there are indications that whole new wave thing was directed pretty much from this CIA and British intelligence family.
And I'll tell you, there's one more thing too. The hardcore punk scene grew out of a Scientology school in Los Angeles. I don't have the information at hand right now, but the first band of the hardcore punk scene came from a Scientology school. All the members were in this school. So there's a lot going on there, for sure.
Yeah. That I'm not familiar with. I haven't stumbled across that yet, but I'm sure I will. But yeah, that's like I say, I don't know if it began with Laurel Canyon, but it certainly has been in full effect ever since then, by all appearances. Yeah, I think and another thing that I haven't looked into is the whole Seattle scene with Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and this whole, these things just sort of happen in these waves, and we're all of a sudden out of some perfectly obscure place, all of these bands just merge, and there's got to be a reason for that. So I haven't looked into that, but there's little doubt in my mind that the whole grunge scene was probably manipulated as well.
Well, I think you strike the right word there, manipulated, because I believe in my research the Clash was sort of a way to divert attention from the Sex Pistols, who were definitely seen as a major threat by the establishment. It was sort of a creation, a band that was created to divert energy away from and attention away from the band. I don't think, like John Coleman thinks, that the countercultures are necessarily created, but I do think they are managed for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
What I'm saying is that I think these things will sort of arise, and then that people will take interest in it because it may be a possible threat.
That's the thing that I'm not 100% sure on yet. Is whether this began as an organic thing and was quickly co-opted, or if it was sort of manufactured from the beginning. That's kind of the big question in my mind at this point that I haven't fully resolved in my own head yet.
Because it didn't necessarily start in Laurel Canyon. It started more in San Francisco. And it sort of migrated down there. So I think that that's a good place for you to be looking in your research, is the interaction between people in San Francisco and Los Angeles.
I'm not 100%. I know. Well, the as far as recorded music, L.A. was definitely ahead of San Francisco. The first San Francisco bands, Grateful Dead and Janis and Big Brother and the Holding Company and Jefferson Airplane and whatnot, their first releases were not until 1967 were the first releases. So they were very big locally. They were very big as local bands, but they had not achieved a national audience yet, because they had not yet been recorded, whereas the LA bands began recording in early 1965. The first Birds single was released, I think, in like March of 65, and by 67, the Birds had albums out, Buffalo Springfield, The Doors, Love. So they were LA was definitely ahead of San Francisco as far as getting the music out on record and out to the general public. I don't know. What's that?
That's where the industry was then. You know, they were closer to the action. But I think that the countercultural influence definitely came from San Francisco.
It's quite possible, yes. I mean, I haven't really sorted out. It's difficult to tell. I mean, a lot of the people that were around in those days, you can't necessarily rely on their memories of what happened when. But I think the San Francisco music scene probably came together sooner, but it was not. It definitely was commercialized first in L.A.
Well, isn't that the point, though, that the person that just perhaps were birthed in Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco area earlier in the 60s, and then there might have been a migration of those same people when I guess the hardware was moved into Los Angeles, and as you said, Dave, also in an earlier show, and that had to become a recording mecca, which it was not previously.
It definitely turned LA into the music capital of the world, as well as the film capital. Yeah, before that, it was sort of spread out between New York and Nashville and wherever the other one was. But yeah, it definitely. But yeah, I mean, Barry Miles noted in his book Hippie, I believe it was, that the soundtrack for the Haight-Ashbury for the first couple of years, from like 1965 and 1967 to 1967, actually came from L.A. because those were the bands that were being recorded. The Birds and the Doors and Buffalo Springfield and all of them, and the San Francisco bands were not yet on record. So for the first couple of years of that scene up there, all the records that were being played were records out of L.A. and out of England, obviously, Beatles and Stones and all that. But, so San Francisco actually came, England was actually first, and then L.A., and then San Francisco, as far as recording. As far as getting the song, getting the stuff on record and getting it out to a wider audience.
Well, people looking at San Francisco, because you get the whole beat influence there too, which I think is something that you can really incorporate into your research. I'm going to let you guys go, but I'm really enjoying your series, and good job.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. We have another caller for you also, Dave. Well, hopefully nobody got hurt in that deal. We have another caller for you, Dave. Are you there, caller?
Yeah, I sure am.
Where are you? Are you calling from Niagara Falls by any chance?
No, actually, I'm calling from. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but it's really broken up there. Yeah. You want a better location to people in? I can do that. here.
Hope that wasn't my phone.
All right, go ahead, caller.
Okay. I wanted to suggest to you, Mr. McGowan, a certain name that probably will end up tying a lot of this together, and that's the name of Edwin Wilson. And the reason I bring up Edwin Wilson is that if you go back to Charlie Manson's childhood, you find that he spent time at Boys Town, and I'm sure you know that. And of course, Boys Town was where Lawrence King was pulling children for his sexual blackmail operations. Lawrence King was merely carrying on with a sexual blackmail operation that had started under Edwin. Well, it was carried out under Edwin Wilson, but Edwin Wilson was in turn had the mantle passed to him by Roy Cohn. And Edwin Wilson basically, when you look at a lot of the intelligence crimes and deep political events of our modern time, most of them go back to Edwin Wilson. And I was wondering if you were familiar with Wilson and his building of basically a private network that the CIA could work through to sidestep congressional oversight, such as the Church and Pike committees.
Not really. I'm familiar with the name. I know who he is, but not real. No, I'm not real familiar with your suggestion. No.
I just thought I would bring him up as a suggestion, as probably a thread to follow. As it relates to Charles Manson and everything, because there seems to be an intersection there between Manson and Edwin Wilson. If you look at Boys Town and everything, and because there's a possibility that Boys Town is actually, basically part of intelligence operations, and certainly during the time of the Lincoln, Nebraska scandal, but it could have gone back to the time when Charles Manson was actually at Boys Town as well.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me at all. No, I mean, that whole institution is just kind of creepy. Really, it wouldn't surprise me at all if it functioned in that manner from its very inception. But I don't have specific information on that. Where would you suggest that I would be the good place to look for the Edwin Wilson information? Is there a website or a book that you're familiar with, or?
The most authoritative author on Edwin Wilson's story that I've found thus far is Joseph Trento. He has actually interviewed Wilson. He interviewed Wilson prior to Wilson's release from prison, actually, as well. And he wrote a book about it based on those interviews called Prelude to Terror. And Joseph Trento is probably the best authority on Edwin Wilson's story to date, because most of the other writers on Edwin Wilson were not privy to the information that Trento was, and thus they characterize Wilson as a rogue. And he was not a rogue. He believed himself to be genuinely working for the Central Intelligence Agency the entire time that he was building up this private intelligence network. And what happened was that Shackley and Klein's basically framed him, left him out to dry, and took over the private intelligence network that he had to help them with. And it looked as if the whole operation was a rogue operation, when in fact it was just the Central Intelligence Agency taking a private route to avoid any kind of congressional scrutiny.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much business as usual. I think that the rogue label is tossed around quite a bit to try to sort of distance official CIA policy from what these, these rogue, out-of-control agents are doing. I think that's pretty much, par for the course. But, so the guy's name is Trento, you said?
Yeah, Joseph Trento. He wrote Prelude to Terror. Yeah, Prelude to Terror is the name of the book. About
is it currently in print? Do you know? Or?
Yeah, it is currently in print. Yeah, it is currently out, and that's basic one to look at because it just seems that he would probably tie into Manson's story if you look at Wilson in Prelude to Terror in conjunction with, of course, Camp's book over the Lincoln, Nebraska scandal and what he says about Boys Town in there. And he goes into a little bit of Edwin Wilson's pedigree. What you find out is that there's been this whole sexual blackmail operation where children are basically taken and turned into Manchurian candidates. And this operation has led all the way from Roy Cohn to Edwin Wilson and on past Wilson and into the current era. And just thought that I'd throw that out. And
Go ahead, Dave. Go, Dave.
Hey.
No, go ahead. Did you want to address that?
I don't know if I have anything specifically, and without having read the source material and being up to speed, I don't know if I have anything specific that I could comment on. I will say that. And I don't know if you have caught up with the series, but in the most recent edition, the most recent post, I did bring up the fact that there was a male escort service in operation in Laurel Canyon, and it was run by the son of a wealthy oil magnate, run from right in the heart of Laurel Canyon, up on Lookout Mountain. And the reason that they got busted is because the operation was also involved in child pornography, and that's what got him into trouble. And while they were investigating the child pornography charges, they discovered that he had been running a male escort service out of Laurel Canyon, and according to several of the escorts that were interviewed by the LAPD, their clientele included J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson. So they had this, it's just the same old story. They just, the Craig Spence case or any of these others. You have this same sort of operation operating right there in the heart of Laurel Canyon, involving child pornography and male escorts, and servicing these very, very high-level public officials. That all ties directly into a lot of what the caller was talking about. So it's very possible that the connections that he's suggesting could be there, but as of yet, I have not dug in that particular area.
Paul, we have another caller. I want to thank you for bringing that up. And
thank you, sir.
No problem. Take care. I appreciate the call, Paul. We have another caller, Dave, from the Great White North, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Biz.
Hello.
Is it me? Hi, Biz.
It's
Karen calling. Hi. Listen, that was fascinating about Phil Oakes and everything, and everything Dave McGowan is just fascinating. I would like to know about Tuesday Well. Does he know anything about Tuesday Well? And her, apparently her connections that way. Does he know anything?
I know of it only from I know it only from an email I received, and I don't remember the specifics. It was one of many that have come in response to the series. And somebody suggested that she was.
Yeah.
I honestly like.
Yeah. Well, no, but apparently, you know, because my mother, she said, "Oh, I love Tuesday Weld as an actress. I loved her. She was just great." But you know, I wonder about her though. Do you know anything about that? But I guess, like you say, you just got some emails, but
also to resonate on what Karen is saying, Dave. She brings up a good point. There are people who have done research in the Tuesday Weld, and I find her extremely interesting beyond her acting career. And again, when you think back to the Manson family, and what we're looking at here is some of the more, shall we say, powerful females, and also perhaps covens and other occult situations that were involved in all this. And I would certainly think you could unearth something of the occult nature beyond the Mansons, even in Laurel Canyon. Did you find anything to that effect?
Well, there's a lot. You find a lot of occult sort of symbolism, a lot of significant events, significant occult days. You know, people turning up dead or houses burning down mysteriously. It seems to very often with major occult, dates that have major occult significance, like April 3rd, Walpurgis Nacht. Mm-hmm. Halloween, or October 12th, which is Aleister Crowley's birthday. That's a big one. So you find a lot of that. You find a lot of sort of symbols, sort of the numerical symbols of that would suggest there's definitely an occult backdrop to all of this. And, a lot of these people, you'll find a lot of references in the reading material about how these people were really into, reading Crowley or, or whatnot. So there was definitely a lot of people that had occult interest, a lot of happened on occult dates. Beyond that, I haven't come across any references to satanic ritual sacrifice.
Well, the only thing about Tuesday Weld was that apparently that she has a background in that, like her family is occultish, and they're actually witches and stuff like that, and it goes back for generations. Apparently, I mean, this is what I read. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I read. So I was just interested in. Well,
that's an old New England family with a lot of ties to what you would call the Eastern establishment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have come across a few references to, other people that, so-and-so's mother was a medium or so-and-so's mother, conducted seances or something, so things to that effect. So that, there's indications that in some cases there's a family background, and there's definitely indications there was a strong interest by a lot of these people in occult readings and whatnot, and a lot of symbolism that pops up. So I mean, if you connect the dots, you can definitely see that there was something going on there.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating, so keep going, guys, because I love it. and just keep talking about Jim Morrison and stuff like that, and that was weird too. Do you really think he was dead or what?
Okay.
I don't know. I have questions in my mind. I mean, there was something very odd about his death, about the fact that he died in Paris. He was an American citizen, obviously, and yet they managed to get him buried in 3 days in this prestigious, real prestigious cemetery there with no service, no autopsy, no nothing. It's just let's just throw this guy in the ground as quickly as possible. and they didn't even announce his death until he was in the ground. So either he didn't die. I mean, they obviously didn't want anybody to see this body. So either there was no body, or he died in a much different way than what we are told. But something is definitely not right with that whole story. And
Raymond Zarek even said that it was weird, that he didn't, not that he would necessarily see the body or anything, but he said it was weird, Raymond Zarek, of the Doors and stuff. So that, it was just strange. It's just strange.
Yeah, it was very odd. It was very odd that they could do that and then just shuffle him off into a grave like that in record time with no investigation, no autopsy, no funeral service, no nothing. Nobody ever saw the body other than supposedly his common-law wife and a couple of ambulance attendants or something. And other than that, no. I mean, there's no real hard evidence that he died that day. But possible that he did. But like I say, either he didn't die, either he faked it to reinvent himself and become something else, which he had expressed an interest in on several occasions, or he was murdered and they disposed of the body as quickly as possible to cover up the fact that he was murdered. But I don't believe it was accident or suicide in any way.
No, I don't either. Well, anyway, that's great. Thanks, guys, and thanks, Viv.
All right.
I love it. Okay.
Thanks for the call, Karen.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. Dave, you got to wonder, too, if Morrison's situation, those circumstances, and the kind of murkiness about, did he or didn't he go or whatever, did that give rise to that movie, Eddie and the Cruisers? You remember that?
Very vaguely. That goes back to like my high school days.
Well,
kind of.
Well, you got to wonder. You got to wonder if that one, or there were a few others like that as well, didn't give rise to a movie like that. And they did a pretty good job with it for the most part. But again, and this brings up the point also that Paul brought up a little bit a while ago, talking about the orphanage of Boys Town. What's interesting here, and I think you can say that, doesn't it seem like the overwhelming preponderance of these rock figures did not come from broken homes, did they? I mean, it wasn't like they plucked some kids who showed some talent in an orphanage and brought them along. Most of these people came from like reasonable households, didn't they?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, a lot of them came from military households, but they like officers. A lot of times intelligence officers. They were. They weren't like necessarily wealthy families, but they certainly weren't like suffering. These weren't kids that dragged themselves up by the bootstraps, so to speak. And the ones that weren't from military intelligence families were a lot of them were from very, very wealthy families. You got guys like Terry Melcher, who was the son of Doris Day, and you got Graham Parsons, whose mother's family owned something like a third of all the citrus groves in Florida and Georgia. Said to be one of the wealthiest families in the state of Florida. And then you had Ned Doheny, who came from the Doheny oil family, one of the wealthiest families in the Los Angeles area. In fact, the home that was built by the Dohenys is to this day said to be the most expensive private residence ever built in the Los Angeles County. So yeah, I mean these are, and Mike Nesmith of the Monkees, his mother like invented liquid paper or something and left him like literally millions of dollars. So yeah, I mean a lot of these people were either from military families or they were from very, very wealthy, private schools and the whole, they were from the very upper crust of society, so to speak. So yeah, you don't find many that were sort of, struggling along, Yeah. Waiting for that big break to come, you know.
No, and again, this might be the last point that we can bring up with some of these personages in and around the rock scenes. But when you mentioned Michael Nesmith, it also triggered something else. And you're right, his mother invented liquid paper. He's a part of the Monkees. You make an interesting comment that the Monkees are very much derided for being a fake rock band. You say differently. We'll get that to a second. But the other thing is also, at least, two of the Monkees were in the Laurel Canyon scene, where Nesmith, I think, always kept himself more or less when he could ensconced in his Texas roots. So could you speak to that whole thing?
Yeah, Pete Dolans and Peter Tork both had homes in Laurel Canyon, and they were both regarded as sort of 24/7 party houses. They were just sort of a constant drop-in party. Peter Tork was said to have a whole bevy of young groupies that hung around his house like all the time, and you could pretty much go over there any time and find half-naked women lounging around his pool. And yeah, those are the kind of things you find in the literature all the time. You know, all of these guys seem to have a harem. Actually, David Crosby. I mean, these guys all had like these harems of groupies follow. You know, they were all kind of like wannabe Charlie Mansons in a way. You know, but Dolans and Tork both had homes in Laurel Canyon, and they were very popular party spots. All of the musicians hung out there and jammed there, and you know, the Nicholson and Hopper would frequently drop by, and they were very much accepted as equals in the, you know, sort of Laurel Canyon musical fraternity. And while even though pretty much denounced by both fans and music critics for being these fakes because they didn't play their own instruments on their albums, and they didn't write their own songs, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But the same was true of most of the other bands as well. The first Birds album, like a third of the songs were written by Bob Dylan, and you know, the others were various other songwriters, and only Jim McGowan originally changed to Roger, I think. But he was the only one that played on their first album and largely on their second album. All the rest of the parts, Crosby's parts and all the other guys, they were all played by studio musicians. And in most cases, they were the same studio musicians that played on the Monkees albums. These were very busy guys. They were known as the Wrecking Crew. And it was like Hal Blaine on drums, Glenn Campbell actually on guitar, Larry Nechtel on bass, and Leon Russell on keyboards. And that sort of core group played on a lot of these people's albums, on the Beach Boys, on the Mamas and the Papas, for the Monkees, for the Byrds. So, you know, you all these people that think that, you know, Glenn Campbell is this, you know, so radically unhip figure, and then they're all cool because they listen to the Byrds and the Beach Boys. Well, guess what? You're listening to Glenn Campbell. Because he's the one that found the tracks on those albums, yeah.
And Glenn Campbell was also in the Groove of the Champs, which gave us the instrumental Tequila.
What? He actually joined the Beach Boys touring group for a while when Brian Wilson first dropped out, decided he wasn't going to tour anymore, which was fairly early on in the Beach Boys' career. His first replacement as on the stage as singer and guitarist was Glenn Campbell, and then
we have to run, Dave. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're up against the hour. Listen, folks, go to davesweb.cnc-host.com. It's davesweb.cnc-host.com. You'll see the series about Inside the LC, the strange but mostly true story of Laurel Canyon and the birth of the hippie generation. Dave, thanks a lot for being with us.